The glove tore before anyone thought to ask whether Rosamund Wren had stolen anything at all. For one sharp, suspended second, the only sound in the dining room was the soft rip of old ivory leather giving way beneath Lady Portia's jeweled fingers. Then the blood appeared, not much, only a thin red line at Rosamund's wrist where the mended seam had split, but enough to make the nearest candle flame seem to tremble. Mayfair had seen reputations ruined by whispers, by letters, by a dance taken twice with the wrong gentleman. Rosamund had always imagined her own disgrace would arrive quietly, with a door closed against her or an invitation never returned. She had not imagined it would happen beneath 3 crystal chandeliers, between the fish course and the syllabub, with 12 pairs of aristocratic eyes fixed upon her exposed wrist as though her skin had confessed before she had spoken. "Hold still," Lady Portia Wren said, her voice sweet enough for the room and sharp enough for Rosamund alone. "If you've nothing to hide, why are you shaking?" Rosamund was not shaking. That was the first injustice. Her fingers were cold, and her heart had struck once against her ribs when Lady Portia touched her throat and cried that her sapphire brooch was gone, but Rosamund's hand had remained steady on the table edge. It had taken years to learn that steadiness. Years of being the poor relation in the house of Cordelia Wren, Countess of Loxham, widow of the late Earl. Years of sitting near the lower end of fine tables, where she could be useful without being honored. Years of writing seating cards, copying charity subscriptions, answering notes, mending gloves, and being reminded that gratitude should look very much like obedience. She lifted her chin by the smallest measure good breeding allowed. "Lady Portia," she said, "you are hurting me." Portia's lashes fluttered. She was beautiful in the expensive, effortless manner society forgave before it understood, with pale gold hair arranged in soft loops and a gown the color of spring cream. As the late Earl of Loxham's daughter, she had been called Lady Portia since childhood, and she wore the courtesy title as though heaven itself had fastened it at her shoulder. "Am I?" she asked. "How unfortunate. I thought you of all people would wish to help us." A murmur passed down the table. It did not rise above politeness. In Lady Loxham's house, cruelty never raised its voice. That was how it endured. The evening had begun with every sign of refinement. Outside, Mayfair lay beneath an April mist that blurred carriage lamps into gold halos. Inside, Lady Loxham's rented townhouse glowed with candles, silver, roses, and a polish so complete it made discomfort seem vulgar. Footmen in dark livery moved without sound. The dining table stretched beneath porcelain so thin it appeared made for hands more fortunate than Rosamund's. Lady Loxham presided at the head in amethyst silk, her diamonds resting at her throat like cold decisions. She had placed Rosamund near the lower end of the table, beside a widowed colonel who had not heard half of what was said and opposite Sir Malcolm Fane, who heard everything that might be turned to advantage. Sir Malcolm had been watching Rosamund's hands since the soup. He was a baronet with a fine profile, careful manners, and the faintly hungry look of a man who smiled while counting other people's weaknesses. When Portia had remarked on Rosamund's old gloves before the first course, Sir Malcolm had leaned back and said, "Practical women often have clever fingers. They know how to make much of very little." Several guests had laughed. Rosamund had folded her hands in her lap and said nothing. The gloves were old. There was no use pretending otherwise. She had mended the right wrist at dawn with thread so fine only a person determined to find poverty would see it. Portia had seen it at once. That was one of her talents. She could find a flaw from across a room if the flaw belonged to someone who could not afford to answer. Rosamund had dressed carefully in her plain dove-grey gown, brushed the nap thin at the cuffs, and told herself that one more dinner could be survived. Survival, in Lady Loxham's house, had always meant silence at the proper moment. It had meant smiling when called practical, lowering her eyes when called fortunate, and remembering that her mother's last letters remained locked in Lady Loxham's writing cabinet, promised someday, withheld always. Then Portia touched her throat and gave a small cry. It was beautifully done. Not too loud. Not too theatrical. Just enough to draw every face toward her. "My brooch," she whispered. Her hand moved over the lace at her bodice. "My sapphire brooch is gone." Lady Loxham became still. "Portia, my love, are you certain? It was here when we came in to dinner." Portia's gaze flickered once toward Rosamund. Only once. I remember touching it when Cousin Rosamund helped arrange my shawl. The room seemed to lengthen. Rosamund felt distance open around her, though no one moved. The Colonel stopped cutting his fish. Sir Malcolm's eyes returned to her hands with quiet satisfaction. Lady Loxham set down her wineglass. The tiny sound was worse than a shout. "Rosamund," she said, "stand, if you please." Rosamund rose. Her knees did not betray her. That mattered. "I did not take Lady Portia's brooch." "No one has accused you," Lady Loxham replied. The lie floated across the candles in flawless society English. "We are merely anxious to settle the matter before servants hear of it." Before servants hear of it. As if servants invented cruelty instead of carrying the trays around it. "Then call for a proper search of the room," Rosamund said. "And let it be done by someone with no interest in the answer." Portia smiled. Sir Malcolm gave a soft laugh. "That is a remarkably bold tone for an innocent woman. Innocence does not require a timid one." The words left Rosamund before caution could catch them. A small silence followed. It was not admiration. It was the silence that came when a woman in the wrong place spoke as if she belonged to herself. Lady Loxham's face hardened beneath its powder. "Your reticule, Rosamund." Rosamund looked at the small beaded bag beside her plate. She had carried nothing into dinner but a handkerchief, a pencil stub, and the key to Lady Loxham's writing cabinet, entrusted to her because she was useful until she became convenient. "If my reticule is to be examined," she said, "I ask that Lady Winbourne witness it. She is seated nearest the door and has no family interest in the matter." Lady Winbourne, who had been studying her wine as if it might save her from moral inconvenience, looked alarmed. Lady Loxham's lips parted. Portia moved first. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Rosamund, don't make a performance of dignity." Her chair scraped back. She came around the table in a whisper of silk and perfume. At her wrists, pale blue gloves gleamed with tiny sapphire clasps that caught the candlelight. "It's only a little bag." Rosamund reached for the reticule herself. Portia caught her wrist. The grip was mostly hidden by the fall of Portia's sleeve, but Rosamund felt the hard pressure of a ring and the sharper pinch of something at Portia's glove fastening. Pain flashed over the old tender place beneath the seam. She did not cry out. She would not give them that. "Let go," she said quietly. Portia's smile did not move. "Why? Are you afraid of what I'll find?" "I am afraid of what you intend to put there." The sentence changed the room. Even Sir Malcolm stopped smiling. Lady Loxham rose halfway from her chair. "Rosamund." It was a warning, polished and lethal. Portia's fingers tightened. Rosamund tried to draw back, not violently, only enough to free herself. The old stitching gave way with a sound as slight as a secret opening. Ivory leather split at her wrist. The red line appeared. Someone gasped. Rosamund looked down at her own exposed skin. For years, the glove had done what she had asked. It had hidden the faint scar from an accident that had never been allowed to accuse anyone important. It had covered the small economies of her life, the frayed cuffs, the cold hands, the proof that she was always mending what others tore. Now it lay open before them all. Portia released her as though shocked by the injury she had caused. "I barely touched her." "Enough," a man said from the doorway. The word did not thunder. It did not need to. It fell with such controlled authority that even Lady Loxham turned before she remembered to arrange her face. Rosamund followed their stares. A tall gentleman stood just inside the dining room, his dark evening coat still carrying the damp sheen of the London mist. He had removed one glove but not the other, as though he had entered in haste and stopped only when the scene before him demanded judgment. His features were severe rather than handsome at first glance, all restraint, shadow, and command. Then the candlelight touched his eyes, and Rosamund saw that they were not cold. They were furious. Not wildly. Precisely. Lady Loxham recovered first. "Your Grace. We had not expected you for another quarter hour." The title passed through the room like a bell. Adrian Mowbray, Duke of Calder-wick. A man spoken of in lowered voices because power did not need to advertise itself when it had been inherited, sharpened, and obeyed. Rosamund had never been introduced to him. Men like the Duke did not notice women placed near the foot of the table. Yet his gaze did not move to Portia's shining hair or Lady Loxham's diamonds. It rested on Rosamund's torn glove, then on the blood at her wrist, then on her face. "So I see," he said. Portia gave a nervous laugh. "It's only a family misunderstanding, Your Grace." The Duke stepped farther into the room. Every footman along the wall seemed to become stone. "Is it?" His voice remained quiet. Because from the doorway, it appeared that a lady was being accused, restrained, and injured before anyone established that a theft occurred. No one answered. The candles burned. Rosamund felt the sting at her wrist and the deeper sting behind her eyes, where tears waited like traitors. She did not lower her head. Not now. Not when, for the first time all evening, someone had described the truth without asking permission from those who had arranged the lie. The Duke looked once more at the torn ivory leather. "No one," he said, "will touch that reticule until I know who benefits from finding something inside it." The room fell silent. And Rosamund, who had spent half her life being unseen, understood with a shock that frightened her more than disgrace. The most powerful man at Lady Loxham's table had seen exactly where the lie began. For a moment after the Duke spoke, Lady Loxham's dining room seemed to forget how to breathe. The candles burned. The silver gleamed. The brooch remained missing, the reticule untouched, and Rosamund stood with her torn glove hanging open at the wrist while every person at the table quietly recalculated the cost of having watched too much and said too little. The Duke of Calder-wick did not fill the silence with anger. He let it expose itself. That was worse. Anger could be dismissed as temper. Silence made witnesses of them all. Lady Loxham was the first to recover, because she had spent a lifetime turning unpleasant truths into matters of tone. "Your Grace," she said, with a smile that belonged at breakfast rather than beside a bleeding wrist, "you have arrived at a most unfortunate instant. My daughter is distressed. A valuable brooch has gone missing, and naturally we wished to settle the matter before idle servants and careless tongues made mischief of it." "Naturally," the Duke said. The single word held no agreement. It only invited her to hear herself. Lady Portia pressed one hand to the place where the sapphire brooch should have rested. The pale blue glove at her wrist flashed again in the candlelight, though Rosamund could no longer bear to look at it directly. "We didn't mean to distress anyone," Portia said. Her voice trembled in the manner society always rewarded. "We only wanted to look inside Rosamund's bag. If she didn't take it, then surely there would be no harm." The Duke turned his gaze upon her. A lady's reputation can be destroyed in the time it takes to open a clasp. Portia's cheeks colored. "You misunderstand me. Perhaps." He looked at Rosamund's wrist. "But I did not misunderstand what I saw." Sir Malcolm Fane shifted in his chair, then settled again when the Duke's eyes moved toward him. Rosamund saw calculation pass across the baronet's face. It was brief, but she had been trained by long dependence to notice brief things. A narrowed eye. A delayed smile. A man deciding whether the room still belonged to him. Lady Loxham's fingers tightened around her wineglass. "I must protest this implication. Rosamund is my late husband's young relation. She has lived under my roof for years. No one here wishes her harm." The old phrase almost worked on Rosamund. Under my roof. It carried meals, gowns altered from Portia's, a narrow bedroom, and the permanent debt of being kept. For a heartbeat, shame rose as if she had been caught being ungrateful. Then the Duke looked at the torn glove again, and the shame lost its footing. "Then we shall be exact," he said. "The reticule will not be searched by Lady Portia, Lady Loxham, Sir Malcolm, or any person with an interest in what may be found there." A small stir moved through the table. Lady Winborne looked as though she wished to become part of the wallpaper. The Duke turned toward her. "Lady Winborne, Miss Wren named you as a witness before the glove was torn. Are you willing to observe that the reticule remains untouched until it is properly examined?" Lady Winborne swallowed. Her hand fluttered once over her pearls. "I suppose I must, Your Grace." Lady Loxham's eyes sharpened. "Really, Francis?" "No," Lady Winborne said, surprising herself most of all. "No, Cordelia. The Duke is right. The matter has become too grave for family convenience. Rosamund felt the words like a small lamp lit in a long corridor. Lady Winborne had not defended her fully. She had not accused Lady Loxham. But she had stepped out of the comfortable line of silence, and that mattered. The Duke inclined his head. "Thank you." He then looked to the footman along the wall. "No servant is to leave this room until the household steward has taken down who entered the dining room, who left it, and when. No object on or near Miss Wren's chair is to be moved. No one touches the reticule." Lady Loxham rose fully now. "This is my house, Your Grace." "Yes," he said. "And it is my misfortune to have entered it in time to become a witness." The answer landed without force, but it changed the room. Lady Loxham could command dependents. She could command servants. She could command Rosamund's meals, letters, duties, and hours. She could not command a duke's witness. Sir Malcolm offered a smooth cough. "Surely, Your Grace, no one suggests Lady Loxham would mishandle a matter beneath her own roof. I suggest only that a woman was nearly searched by the same circle that had already decided how she should look while being doubted." The Duke turned toward him. "You were attentive during dinner, Sir Malcolm." The baronet smiled carefully. "I try to be agreeable company. Did you see Miss Wren touch Lady Portia's brooch?" The question was plain. That made it dangerous. Sir Malcolm's gaze flicked to Lady Loxham, then to Portia, then back to the Duke. "I cannot say that I did. That is not what I asked." The pause widened. "No, Your Grace. I did not." Rosamund let out no sound, but something inside her loosened by a fraction. It did not clear her. It did not save her. Yet one false stone had been removed from the wall they were building around her. Portia's mouth tightened. "She helped me with my shawl before dinner." "That may be true," the Duke said. "It is not the same as being seen taking a brooch." Lady Loxham's voice cooled. "And what, precisely, do you propose to do with my young relation?" The phrase "my young relation" slipped across the table like a claim. The Duke did not accept it. He moved closer to Rosamund, stopping at a distance proper enough that even malice would have difficulty twisting it. "Miss Wren's wrist requires care. The room requires order. I will send for my carriage and for Lady Augusta Mowbray, my aunt, to receive her at Calder-wick House as chaperone. Miss Wren may choose whether to accompany me or to name another lady present whose protection she trusts." Rosamund stared at him. It was not the offer of a fairy tale. It was more startling than that. It was a choice shaped carefully enough to survive society's teeth. Lady Loxham saw the danger at once. A young unmarried woman does not leave her family's house in a duke's carriage without consequences. She does not remain in a room where her dignity has been made conditional upon allowing herself to be searched, the Duke replied. Then, to Rosamund, his voice altered. Not softened exactly. Cleared. "Miss Wren, you are not obliged to come. If you prefer Lady Winborne, or another lady present, I will arrange it. But I will not leave you here unless you tell me you wish to stay." Rosamund looked at Lady Loxham. The Countess's face had gone very still, the way it did before a door closed, before a letter was withheld, before breakfast passed with every servant instructed not to hear her name. She looked at Portia, who was pale with anger beneath her delicate distress. She looked at Sir Malcolm, whose sympathy sat on him like a borrowed coat. Then she looked at the reticule beside her plate, at the little beaded bag that someone had been so eager to open. If she stayed, the story would be finished before morning. If she left, the story might become worse. But it would not be theirs alone. "I will go with Lady Augusta as chaperone," she said. Her voice did not tremble. Lady Loxham's smile thinned. "Think carefully, Rosamund. Your mother's memory deserves better than public rebellion." The words struck where they were meant to strike. The letters. The locked cabinet. The last pages her mother had written in a hand Rosamund barely remembered and had never been allowed to keep. For 1 second, grief made the room blur. The Duke saw the blow land, though he could not yet know its name. His eyes narrowed by the smallest degree. Rosamund folded her injured hand against her waist. "My mother's memory deserves truth," she said. Lady Loxham went silent. It was the first honest thing she had given the evening. The Duke turned to the nearest footman. "My carriage. And send a note ahead to Lady Augusta Mowbray. Inform her that Miss Wren will arrive under my escort and requires immediate care for her wrist." The footman moved. No one stopped him. The dinner did not resume. It dissolved into rustling silk, averted eyes, and whispered calculations. A servant brought clean linen at the Duke's instruction, and Rosamund wrapped it around her wrist without assistance. No one at the table offered any. She would remember that. When her cloak could not be fetched without sending someone upstairs into Lady Loxham's control, the Duke removed his own dark cloak from a footman's arm. He did not place it on her shoulders. He held it out. "The night is cold," he said. "You may return it when you choose." That phrase undid her more nearly than kindness should have done. "When you choose." Rosamund accepted the cloak and wrapped it around herself, tucking the torn wrist beneath the heavy wool. At the door, Portia's voice followed her. "This won't make people believe you, Rosamund." Rosamund paused. The room behind her had once contained everything she was expected to fear. Now it looked smaller. "Perhaps not," she said. "But it may make them wonder why you were so eager to search me." Outside, the April mist had thickened over Mayfair. The carriage lamps glowed against the damp street, and the cobblestones shone like dark glass. The Duke handed Rosamund in with formal precision, careful not to touch more than courtesy required. A maid from Lady Loxham's household was placed inside until they reached Calder-wick House, and the footman rode close enough to satisfy the world's appetite for propriety. Even rescue, Rosamund realized, had to be armored against gossip. The carriage began to move. For several seconds, no one spoke. Rosamund listened to the wheels, the hooves, the muted city beyond the glass. Her wrist ached beneath the linen. Her future ached more. Tomorrow, Mayfair would decide whether she was a thief, a schemer, a ruined dependent, or something worse because a duke had noticed her. She lowered her eyes and saw his hand opposite her. He had not discarded the torn strip of her glove. It lay folded across his palm, protected from the damp as though it were not ruined leather but testimony. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "it is only a piece of a glove." He looked at it, then at her. "No, Miss Wren." His voice remained controlled, but there was nothing cold in it. "It's the first evidence that room could not teach to lie." Rosamund turned toward the window before he could see how close she was to tears. In the reflection, she watched him place the torn ivory strip inside his coat with deliberate care. Not as if he had rescued a woman. As if he had taken custody of the truth. Calder-wick House received Rosamund as if scandal were not a surprise but an expected caller who had arrived without the proper card. The carriage had scarcely halted beneath the black portico before two footmen appeared through the April mist, their faces composed, their movements swift, and their eyes trained carefully away from the torn glove beneath the Duke's cloak. That restraint unnerved Rosamund more than open curiosity would have done. At Lady Loxham's house, every servant had learned the art of pretending not to see what might later be useful. Here, the silence felt different. It was not denial. It was discipline. The Duke stepped down first, then offered his hand with formal precision, touching only as much as courtesy required. Rosamund accepted because refusing would have made an awkwardness neither of them deserved, but the steadiness of his palm startled her. She had expected power to feel hard. It felt controlled. The door opened before they reached it, and a silver-haired butler bowed. "Lady Augusta is in the blue morning room, Your Grace." "Thank you, Reeves. Send for Mrs. Bellamy. Warm water, clean linen, and salve." The Duke turned to Rosamund. "A physician, if you wish one." She shook her head. Then, remembering where she stood, she added, "No, Your Grace. It is only a scratch." His gaze lowered to the linen at her wrist, where a small red stain had already spread through the fold. People often say only when they have been taught that more is inconvenient. The words struck with such quiet accuracy that Rosamund looked away. The hall rose around her in marble, shadow, and candlelight. It was larger than Lady Loxham's rented house, but less eager to prove itself. Portraits watched from the walls, not kindly, but with the indifference of ancestors accustomed to endurance. Rosamund felt suddenly aware of the thinness of her gown beneath the Duke's cloak, the old darn near her hem, the pulse at her injured wrist. She had been brought into a Duke's house under circumstances Mayfair would sharpen by breakfast. Yet the Duke did not hurry her through the hall like an embarrassment. He walked at her pace. The blue morning room was warm, book-lined, and occupied by a woman who looked as though she had never once apologized for taking up space. Lady Augusta Mowbray stood by the hearth in dark grey silk, her silver hair arranged beneath a lace cap. One hand resting on a cane she appeared to use more as punctuation than support. She looked first at Adrian, then at Rosamund, then at the torn glove. "You are late," she said. "And you have brought evidence." "I had hoped to bring a guest," the Duke replied. "The evening made that difficult." Lady Augusta's eyes sharpened. "The evening often does. Miss Wren, sit down before my nephew attempts to solve bleeding by staring at it." Rosamund almost forgot to curtsy. "Lady Augusta, I am sorry to disturb you." "My dear, if you apologize before I decide whether I am disturbed, you deprive me of one of age's few remaining pleasures." Rosamund blinked. The Duke looked toward the mantel, and she suspected he was hiding amusement. That small human possibility loosened the terror in her chest by a thread. She sat in the chair nearest the fire only after Lady Augusta pointed to it with unmistakable authority. Mrs. Bellamy arrived with linen and a basin, a composed woman with intelligent eyes and a ring of household keys at her waist. She did not gasp at the torn glove. She did not ask whether Rosamund had stolen anything. She merely placed the basin on a small table and said, "If you please, miss." Rosamund extended her hand. The old glove resisted when Lady Augusta eased it back from the wrist, and Rosamund flinched before she could stop herself. The Duke saw. Of course he saw. He seemed to notice small things with the discipline other men reserved for estates and elections. Lady Augusta paused. "This seam has been mended several times." Rosamund stared at the fire. It was still serviceable. That was not a criticism. The older woman dipped a cloth into warm water. Women mend things for two reasons. Because the thing has value, or because replacement requires permission from someone ungenerous. The cloth touched Rosamund's wrist. The scrape itself was shallow, but the skin beneath the seam was tender with old memory. She kept her fingers still. She had learned that long before dinner parties and Duke's carriages. Lady Augusta cleaned the wound with brisk gentleness. "Does it pain you?" "Not much. That was not what I asked." Rosamund looked up. Lady Augusta's expression had not softened, but it had become safe in a manner softness often failed to be. "Yes," Rosamund said. "A little. Better." The Duke stood near the mantel with the torn strip of ivory glove still in his hand. He had not put it down. "How long," he asked, "have they been teaching you to apologize for being harmed?" The room went utterly still. Mrs. Bellamy lowered her eyes to the basin, giving privacy without leaving. Lady Augusta's hand paused over the bandage. Rosamund felt the question open a door inside her that she had long ago mistaken for a wall. No one had asked it that way before. People had asked whether she had misunderstood, whether Lady Portia had meant no harm, whether Lady Loxham had not been generous enough, whether a girl with no fortune could afford pride. They had not asked who trained her to call injury inconvenience. "I do not know," she said at last. "Perhaps after my mother died. Perhaps after my father followed her. Lady Loxham said family must gather its own, and I was 13 when she took me in." "Gather," Lady Augusta repeated. The word became a verdict. Rosamund watched the linen turn faintly pink in the basin. "I had a roof. Gowns altered from Lady Portia's. A place at table when there was space. I learned accounts because my hand was neat. I copied invitations, charity lists, subscription notes, household memoranda." "Were you paid?" the Duke asked. The question startled her. "No, then it was useful work only for someone else." Lady Augusta tied the bandage with a neat knot. "And your mother?" Rosamund's breath caught. "She left letters for me. Lady Loxham keeps them in her writing cabinet. She says they will be mine when I show proper gratitude and steadiness." The words sounded smaller aloud than they had felt for years. That humiliated her most. How could a locked packet of paper hold so much power over a grown woman? Yet it had. Every time Rosamund thought of refusing a task, speaking too plainly, or leaving the room before Lady Loxham dismissed her, she remembered that cabinet. She remembered being told her mother had written of hope, duty, and love. She remembered never being allowed to read more than one line at a time, as if affection were a sweetmeat to be earned by obedience. The Duke's expression changed. Not dramatically. His anger seemed to move inward, where it became more dangerous. She kept your mother's letters from you. She said they were safer there. Lady Augusta gave a short, humorless breath. People who lock away love often call themselves careful. Rosamund looked at the bandage. Please do not think I am ungrateful. There are girls who have less than I was given. That may be true, Lady Augusta said. It does not make what was taken from you generous. Silence followed, deep and clean. Rosamund did not know what to do with a room where truth did not immediately require apology. The Duke crossed to the small table and placed the torn glove strip beside the basin. He did not touch her hand. You copied Lady Loxham's charity accounts? Yes. Recently? This week? There were figures that did not balance. His gaze sharpened. Did you ask about them? Twice. Lady Loxham told me not to trouble myself. Lady Portia was in the writing room both times. Lady Augusta and the Duke exchanged a glance. It was brief, but Rosamund saw enough. The missing brooch had become a larger thing in their minds. Larger, and more dangerous. Before anyone could speak, Reeves entered with a silver tray and a card. Delivered by hand from Lady Loxham, Your Grace. The Duke took it. As he read, the room seemed to cool. Lady Augusta's fingers tightened on her cane. Well? The Duke looked at Rosamund. Lady Loxham requires your return by morning. If you refuse, she writes that society will understand your absence as an admission of guilt and a rejection of family protection. Rosamund's wrist throbbed beneath the clean linen. Family protection, she said quietly. Lady Augusta's mouth thinned. A fine phrase, when sharpened properly. The Duke turned the card over. His face went colder. There is a postscript. Rosamund knew before he read it that Lady Loxham had found the tenderest place left to press. She writes that certain personal effects belonging to your late mother remain in her keeping, and she trusts you will not force her to reconsider what should be preserved. The fire cracked softly. Rosamund did not move. The letters. Her mother's hand. The locked cabinet. The last proof that she had once belonged to someone without being useful first. Lady Augusta rose slowly, all traces of dry humor gone. Cordelia Loxham always did know how to make a hostage look like a keepsake. The Duke folded the card with deliberate care. Miss Wren, he said, and for the first time since dinner his voice held no command at all, only a question waiting to be answered. Rosamund looked at the torn ivory glove on the table, the clean bandage on her wrist, and the card that threatened not only her name but the memory of the woman who had given it to her. I cannot go back tonight, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not break. But I cannot let her keep them forever. The Duke's eyes held hers. Then we will learn what else she is keeping. By morning, Lady Loxham's threat had learned to dress itself as concern. It arrived in 3 forms before breakfast: a second note, a rumour carried through a footman's cousin, and a sealed box delivered from Lady Winbourne's house by a groom who looked as though he wished never to be trusted with anything again. Rosamund stood in the blue morning room while Reeves placed the box upon the table with the solemnity of a man setting down a sleeping serpent. Lady Augusta sat near the fire with her cane across her knees, fully dressed in dark violet silk and already displeased with the world. The Duke stood by the window, reading the latest note from Lady Loxham in a silence so controlled that Rosamund began to recognize it as anger under discipline. Lady Winbourne sends her compliments, Reeves said, and writes that the reticule has not left her sight except to be sealed in this box by her own maid, with 2 footmen present. Lady Augusta lifted one brow. Frances Winbourne has discovered a spine. I shall send flowers before she loses the habit. Rosamund tried to smile, but the sight of her own reticule behind the broken seal stole the attempt from her. The little beaded bag looked harmless, almost foolish, lying on folded white cloth. Last night it had been the mouth of a trap. Mrs. Bellamy entered with clean gloves, a small magnifying glass, and the practical expression of a woman who preferred facts to drama. "With permission, Your Grace, I will not open the reticule. I will examine the fabric first." The Duke nodded. "Nothing is to be disturbed until Miss Wren agrees." Rosamund looked at him quickly. He had not said "until I agree." The difference was small enough to escape most ears and large enough to steady hers. Mrs. Bellamy bent over the bag. She did not hurry. She touched the velvet lightly, turned it only by the cloth beneath, and studied the beaded clasp without pressing it open. "No strain here," she said at last. "No weight mark in the velvet." A brooch the size Lady Portia described would have pressed against the lining if hidden inside for any length of time. Lady Augusta leaned forward. "Could it have been placed and removed quickly?" "It could, my lady. But not carried through dinner without leaving some disturbance. The beads are too delicate." Rosamund let out a breath she had not known she was holding. It was not freedom. It was only one door refusing to lock. The Duke set Lady Loxham's note beside the box. "Then this will interest you." Rosamund braced herself. "The brooch has been found." He looked at her. "Beneath your chair in Lady Loxham's dining room." Lady Augusta made a sound of contempt that needed no words. Mrs. Bellamy's hands stilled above the reticule. Rosamund stared at the note, though she could not read it from where she stood. "Beneath my chair. Discovered this morning by Lady Loxham's housekeeper, according to the Countess. After Lady Winbourne had watched my bag. After the servants had been told not to leave. After everyone had reason to know the reticule could not serve them." Her voice remained calm. That frightened her more than trembling would have done. "How clean was it?" The Duke's gaze sharpened. "What made you ask that?" Rosamund looked down at her bandaged wrist. "Because if it had lain beneath my chair through dinner, it would have dust from the carpet, perhaps wax, perhaps a thread. Lady Loxham's carpets are old beneath the table, though she keeps the edges hidden by flowers." Mrs. Bellamy looked at the Duke. "A sensible point." The Duke unfolded the note again. "Lady Loxham writes that the brooch was found in perfect condition, which she considers providential." "Providence is receiving much blame this week," Lady Augusta said. Rosamund felt the room shift around the word perfect. Perfect meant placed. Perfect meant someone had waited until the first lie failed and chosen another. Her thoughts moved to Lady Loxham's writing room, to the cabinet with her mother's letters, to the charity accounts that would not balance, and then to a face pale beneath a maid's cap. Elsie. The young maid had been near the writing room the afternoon before the dinner, holding folded napkins while Lady Portia came out too quickly with a smile too fixed. Rosamund had noticed because no one noticed maids unless they broke something. She had learned to see the unseen because she had lived close to their edge. "Elsie," she said. The Duke turned from the window. "The maid you mentioned last night?" "Yes. She was near the writing room yesterday. Portia saw her. If the brooch was placed later, if the accounts are part of this, then Elsie may have seen something without knowing it." Lady Augusta's face grew still. "And if you cannot be made useful as the thief, the maid can." Rosamund nodded. The thought made her stomach tighten. Lady Loxham dismissed a scullery girl once for cracking a saucer. She sent her away without a proper character. Elsie has no family in London that I know of. No one would invite a maid to explain herself before dinner guests. The Duke folded the note. "You will not return to that house." It was immediate, protective, and wrong. Rosamund looked at him. "Your Grace." He heard the warning in her voice. To his credit, he did not pretend not to. "Tell me. If I remain safe here while they choose a smaller target, then my safety becomes part of the same cruelty." Lady Augusta watched them without interrupting. The Duke's jaw tightened. "You think I would permit them to punish a maid in your place? I think men of power often prevent the harm they can see and underestimate the harm done behind closed doors." The words felt dangerous. She spoke them anyway. Elsie may already be frightened. If she is accused, she may confess to anything if promised a place or threatened with the loss of one. The Duke looked away for one breath, toward the grey square beyond the window. When he turned back, his expression had changed. Not softened. Corrected. You are right. Rosamund had expected argument. The absence of it left her uncertain. I do not ask to go back because I trust them. I know. I ask because someone must know what they are doing before they do it to someone easier to crush. Then we learn before they move. He rang. Reeves appeared almost at once. The Duke's instructions were quiet and exact. Mrs. Bellamy was to make inquiries through respectable servants' channels regarding Elsie, without bribery and without exposing the girl. A place was to be held for any maid dismissed from Lady Loxham's service without character. Lady Winbourne was to be thanked for preserving the reticule. Mr. Tustall, the Duke's solicitor, was to be sent for. No answer was to be returned to Lady Loxham yet. When Reeves withdrew, the room felt less like refuge and more like preparation. Rosamund touched the edge of the table, steadying herself. There is something else. The Duke waited. She closed her eyes for 1 second, summoning the image she had tried not to revisit. Portia's hand closing over her wrist. Pale blue kid leather. The little flash at the cuff. Pain, pressure, tearing. Lady Portia wore pale blue gloves last night. There were sapphire clasps at the wrists. One caught the candlelight when she reached for me. Lady Augusta leaned forward. Are you certain? Yes. I remember because I was looking at her hands, not her face. The Duke's eyes moved to the folded strip of torn ivory glove, which lay on the desk where he had placed it after arriving. If one clasp caught in the seam when the glove tore, he did not finish. He did not need to. Mrs. Bellamy crossed to the desk but stopped before touching the torn piece. Shall I examine it, Your Grace? The Duke looked to Rosamund. May she? Again, the question. Again, that careful space where command might have stood. Rosamund nodded. Mrs. Bellamy unfolded the ivory leather with a seamstress's precision. For a moment, no one spoke. The strip was frayed, stained faintly at one edge, and old enough to look almost ashamed of being studied by such important people. Mrs. Bellamy bent closer. The seam is torn, but the inner fold is tight. If something caught there, it may not be visible without loosening the stitches. Rosamund's heart quickened. Do not loosen them yet. The Duke studied her. Why? Because if there is anything there, we need someone beyond this house to witness it. Lady Loxham will say you placed it for me. Lady Augusta's mouth curved. There is the girl who survived Cordelia's dining room. It was almost praise. Rosamund accepted it like warmth held at a distance. The Duke nodded. Mr. Tustall will witness the examination. And perhaps Lady Winbourne, if she can be persuaded to continue being brave. Do not ask too much of her at once, Lady Augusta said. Spines, like gloves, split under pressure. The attempt at humor eased the room, but only slightly. The stakes had changed. A brooch beneath a chair could be dismissed as confusion, a maid blamed as carelessness, a poor relation ruined as convenience. A clasp caught in a torn seam would be harder to explain. Rosamund looked toward the window. Mayfair lay beyond it, orderly and brightening, pretending not to sharpen its knives before luncheon. Somewhere inside Lady Loxham's house, Elsie might already be carrying trays with fear in both hands. Somewhere behind a locked writing cabinet, Rosamund's mother's letters waited, used as bait by a woman who called herself family. The Duke came to stand beside the table, not near enough to crowd her, but near enough that his presence steadied the air. This is no longer only about a brooch, he said. No, Rosamund replied. It never was. He looked at the clean reticule, the too perfect note, and the torn glove that might yet hold a blue spark of truth. Then we will move carefully. Rosamund met his eyes. And quickly. For the first time, the severity in his face almost became approval. Carefully and quickly, then. Outside, a carriage passed in the square, wheels hissing over damp stone. Inside Calder-wick House, the lie had not yet broken, but its first seam had begun to pull. By noon, Calder-wick House had turned uncertainty into ink. Reeves had sent for Mr. Tustall. Lady Augusta had taken possession of the blue morning room as if it were a committee chamber under siege, and Mrs. Bellamy had placed the torn glove in a locked drawer until a proper witness could examine the seam. Rosamund sat at a small writing table near the window, watching the April light move across the carpet in pale squares. Her bandaged wrist rested on her lap. Her reticule lay untouched in its sealed box. Lady Loxham's notes lay beside it, each one folded with the tidy malice of a woman who had never raised her voice because others had always obeyed it anyway. The Duke stood near the mantel, reading a brief report from Reeves regarding the Loxham servants. No one had reached Elsie yet. That fact made Rosamund feel the day narrowing around her. She had slept little, eaten less, and yet her mind seemed painfully awake. The lie had grown overnight from a missing brooch into a chair, a reticule, a maid, a glove clasp, a writing cabinet, and her mother's letters. Every thread led back to Lady Loxham's house. Every thread had once been tied around Rosamund quietly enough that she had mistaken the knots for shelter. Lady Augusta set down her teacup. Before the rest of London begins arranging Miss Wren's fate for its entertainment, we shall arrange the facts for her protection. Rosamund looked up. My lady, you cannot remain in this house as a distressed young woman with no position, no chaperone beyond my convenience, and half of Mayfair already sharpening its tongue. Truth requires propriety as its carriage. Without it, even honest people are forced to walk through mud. The Duke folded the report. My aunt proposes that you remain here as her temporary companion and correspondence assistant. Rosamund's first response was refusal, not because the offer was unkind, but because kindness had so often arrived with a key hidden inside it. I am grateful, but I cannot accept charity. Lady Augusta gave her a look of brisk approval. Excellent. Neither can I endure offering it when employment would do. I have correspondence enough to weary 3 clerks and a patience unsuitable for the task. You have a trained hand, practical intelligence, and a knowledge of charitable accounts that has apparently alarmed the wrong people. You will be paid. Paid. The word entered the room softly and struck like a bell inside Rosamund. She had copied names, figures, invitations, menus, seating plans, and polite refusals for years. Lady Loxham had called it family duty. Portia had called it helping. No one had called it work loudly enough to put money beside it. If I accept, Rosamund said slowly, there must be terms. The Duke's eyes sharpened, but he did not interrupt. Lady Augusta leaned back. Name them. Rosamund clasped her uninjured hand over the bandage. It steadied her to feel both pain and control at once. I must be free to leave by my own decision, not only when others judge it proper. Agreed, Lady Augusta said. I must be paid in writing, not through gifts, loans, or favors that can later be made into debts. Agreed. Rosamund looked at the Duke. This condition was for him, though she could hardly explain why without sounding ungrateful. My name must not be used in any social arrangement, public explanation, legal statement, engagement, or appeal without my knowledge and consent. A silence followed. She saw the Duke understand that the condition was not abstract. It was born from a lifetime of hearing decisions made above her head. Agreed, he said. The word was quiet. He looked not offended, but corrected. And Elsie, Rosamund continued. Any inquiry must consider her safety before its usefulness. Lady Augusta's expression softened by 1 degree. Also agreed. The Duke rang, and Reeves soon announced Mr. Tustell. The solicitor entered with a leather case, iron-grey hair, and the weary calm of a man who had spent decades watching respectable people become interesting when money appeared. He bowed to Lady Augusta, to the Duke, and then to Rosamund with exact, unexaggerated courtesy. That courtesy mattered. Too little would have dismissed her. Too much would have made her a spectacle. Mr. Tustell sat at the writing table and drafted the agreement in clean, narrow script while Lady Augusta dictated the terms with crisp precision. Miss Rosamund Wren would serve as paid companion and correspondence assistant to Lady Augusta Mowbray at Calder-wick House. Her presence would be chaperoned and proper. She could depart at her discretion. Her name would not be used in any arrangement without her consent. Her wage would be stated plainly. Any matter concerning Elsie, maid in the Loxham household, would be handled with attention to the protection of her character. When the paper was placed before Rosamund, she stared at it longer than necessary. There was her name, written not in the margin of someone else's obligation, but at the center of a sentence that granted her choice. Mr. Tustall offered the pen. "If the terms satisfy you, Miss Wren." Her fingers tightened around it. "I am only unused to seeing my freedom written in ink." Lady Augusta looked toward the fire. The Duke looked down. Mr. Tustall, to his credit, pretended to inspect his blotter. Rosamund signed. The line trembled at the end, but it held. Before the ink had dried, Reeves entered again with a card on a silver salver. "From Sir Malcolm Fane, Your Grace. Delivered first to Lady Loxham's house, then copied and sent here by Lady Winbourne's groom, who thought it might be of interest." Lady Augusta murmured, "Frances Winbourne's spine is strengthening by the hour. I may have to invite her to luncheon." The Duke took the card. As he read, the room seemed to cool. "Sir Malcolm has informed Lady Loxham that, in light of recent distress, he is willing to offer Miss Wren the protection of marriage." Rosamund did not move. She had expected some further accusation, perhaps another demand, perhaps a reminder of her mother's letters. A proposal sounded gentler and felt more dangerous. "How charitable of him," Lady Augusta said. "A noose tied with white ribbon." Mr. Tustall's eyes lifted. "Sir Malcolm Fane is not a wealthy man." "No," the Duke said. "He is a baronet with expensive habits and increasingly patient creditors, though patience is never eternal." Rosamund looked at him. "You knew." "I knew he had debts. I did not know until this morning that they had become urgent." Mr. Tustall opened his case and removed a smaller memorandum. "There were rumors of notes coming due within the month. 2 creditors have lately refused extension." Lady Augusta's gaze moved to Rosamund. "And what would he gain by marrying you?" Rosamund's first instinct was to say nothing. Lady Loxham had always insisted the matter was too tedious for her to understand, which meant it was important enough to hide. "My father left a small settlement," she said. "Not grand. Not enough to tempt a truly rich man. But enough, perhaps, to tempt one who needed ready money. Lady Loxham said she acted as trustee through her solicitor, Mr. Vale of Chancery Lane. She told me the settlement could not be touched until I married, unless certain permissions were granted." Mr. Tustall became very still. "Did Sir Malcolm know of this settlement?" "Lady Loxham spoke of it once when she thought I was outside the room. She said a sensible match could solve several inconveniences. Sir Malcolm was with her." The Duke's hand closed over the back of a chair. Not hard enough to make a sound. Firm enough to show restraint had weight. "The accusation was not merely meant to shame you." Rosamund looked at the card on the salver. "It was meant to make him look like my only respectable escape." "Yes," Mr. Tustall said. "A disgraced dependent girl offered marriage by a titled gentleman would be expected to weep with gratitude." Rosamund felt a cold clarity settle through her. A brooch could ruin her reputation. A forged account could make society righteous in condemning her. A public offer from Sir Malcolm could lock the door and call it mercy. Lady Loxham had not improvised cruelty. She had arranged options until only one remained. The Duke turned to her. "Do you wish me to refuse him on your behalf?" The question was careful. It had to be. Rosamund heard the effort in it and honored him for making it, though she could not afford to soften the answer. "No." His gaze held hers. "No. I wish to refuse him myself. But not yet." Lady Augusta's mouth curved faintly. "There is the interesting answer." Rosamund picked up Sir Malcolm's card without touching the edges more than necessary. "If he believes I am cornered, he may speak more freely. If Lady Loxham believes I fear the proposal, she may hurry. People who set traps grow careless when they think the animal has stopped moving." The Duke looked at her for a long moment, as though seeing something new and not entirely comfortable. "That is dangerous. So is gratitude to the wrong person." The words came quietly, but they filled the room. Mr. Tustall made a note. Lady Augusta looked satisfied. The Duke did not smile. His expression was too grave for that. Yet something in his eyes shifted, not admiration alone, but respect made wary by the cost of earning it. "Then we will not answer Sir Malcolm yet," he said. "We will ask Mr. Tustall to learn what Mr. Vale has done with the settlement. We will find Elsie before Lady Loxham can move her." And we will discover who profits from your ruin before he can make your ruin useful. Rosamund looked at her signed name drying on the page, the reticule that had not betrayed her, the glove locked away until truth could be properly witnessed, and the card from a man offering marriage as if rescue and possession were the same thing. Yesterday, she had been a poor relation accused at a table where no one defended her. Today, she had wages, terms, a solicitor, enemies in motion, and a duke learning to ask before he acted. It was not safety. Not yet. But for the first time, the trap had a map. The first return to society came dressed as tea, which made it more dangerous than an open accusation. A ballroom at least admitted it wished to be watched. Lady Winborne's drawing room pretended it had only gathered a few ladies for polite conversation, lemon cakes, and the delicate exchange of news too sharp to be called gossip. By 3 o'clock the following afternoon, Rosamund sat beside Lady Augusta Mowbray on a pale green sofa, holding a porcelain cup she had not yet tasted while half of Mayfair learned how to look at a woman without appearing to stare. The visit had been arranged with ruthless propriety. Lady Winborne had sent a written invitation. Lady Augusta had accepted with equal formality. Rosamund had arrived in the Calder-wick carriage with a maid inside and a footman on the box. Her position as Lady Augusta's paid companion had been quietly mentioned to anyone likely to repeat it badly. Every rule had been obeyed. That did not make the room kind. It only made the cruelty careful. Lady Winborne's drawing room was narrow enough that avoidance became visible. Rosamund saw it at once. Lady Barrington, who had been seated on the chair nearest the sofa, rose when Rosamund entered and crossed the room to admire a vase she had certainly seen before. Another patroness paused with a plate in her hand, noticed Rosamund's bandaged wrist beneath the grey glove, and chose a seat 3 chairs farther away than convenience required. No one said thief. No one needed to. Society rarely wasted a blade when a shifted chair could cut just as cleanly. Lady Augusta leaned close enough that only Rosamund could hear. "Drink your tea. I am not thirsty." "Neither am I. Tea has survived worse indifference." Rosamund lifted the cup because obedience to Lady Augusta felt nothing like obedience to Lady Loxham. It had no hook inside it. The warm porcelain steadied her fingers. Her right wrist still ached beneath the fresh glove Mrs. Bellamy had found for her, but the ache reminded her she had not imagined the dinner, the grip, the tear, the way the Duke had looked first at the wound and only afterward at the lie. Across the room, Lady Winborne was trying to speak of music to a woman who clearly preferred scandal. The attempt might have been comic if Rosamund had not understood how much courage it cost Lady Winborne to invite her at all. "Miss Wren," Lady Barrington said at last, approaching with the solemn smile of one who had decided virtue required conversation. "How pleasant to see you recovered." Rosamund rose. "You are kind, Lady Barrington. We were all distressed by the unpleasantness. Of course, one hopes it was only confusion." "Confusion improves when examined," Rosamund said. Lady Barrington blinked. Lady Augusta's cup paused halfway to her mouth, and Rosamund suspected she was pleased. Before Lady Barrington could decide whether she had been insulted, the room shifted. A footman announced the Countess of Loxham and Lady Portia Wren. Every head turned. Lady Loxham entered in deep plum silk, her widow's dignity arranged so perfectly that no one unfamiliar with her would have seen the anger beneath it. Lady Portia followed in pale blue, fragile as a painted saint, her eyes already bright. Rosamund looked first at Portia's wrists. White gloves today. Pearl buttons. No sapphire clasps. Lady Loxham crossed to Lady Winborne with a smile of injured grace. "Forgive this intrusion, Frances. A mother's heart is not always obedient to ceremony. I heard Rosamund was here, and I could not rest until I saw that she was well." A mother's heart. Rosamund felt the phrase strike the hidden place where her own mother's letters waited behind Lady Loxham's locked cabinet. The Countess knew exactly where to press. Lady Augusta's cane touched the carpet once. "How reassuring, Cordelia, that your heart has become active after the injury rather than before it." The room went very still. Lady Loxham's smile did not change. "Lady Augusta, I fear you have been given an incomplete account. At my age, I assume all accounts are incomplete until receipts appear." A few ladies glanced down at their cups. Portia moved closer to Rosamund, her voice trembling just enough. Rosamund, we don't wish for this ugliness to continue. We only want things made right. Rosamund stood because sitting would have made her feel cornered. Then begin with the truth. Portia's lips parted. I have told the truth. I was frightened. My brooch was gone. You had helped with my shawl. Anyone would wonder. Wondering does not require tearing a glove. I didn't mean to hurt you. No, Rosamund said. You said you barely touched me. A quiet breath passed through the room. Lady Loxham's gaze sharpened. My dear girl, bitterness will not serve you. If you would only allow this family matter to be settled with humility, much could still be spared. The dinner was not private. Rosamund heard her own voice and marveled that it remained level. My wrist was not torn in private. My reticule was not requested in private. I do not see why truth must now be private for the comfort of those who made accusation public. Lady Barrington whispered behind her fan. Lady Winborne looked both terrified and impressed. Portia's eyes filled. Mamma, please. I cannot bear this. I never wanted Rosamund disgraced. Then you should have objected before I was asked to open my bag, Rosamund said. Sir Malcolm Fane's voice came from the doorway. A good name is best preserved by modest conduct, Miss Wren. He had entered with the smooth timing of a man who preferred rooms already weakened by discomfort. He bowed first to Lady Loxham, then to Lady Augusta, and last to Rosamund with a gravity that made his attention feel like a hand closing over a purse. I am relieved to see you among friends. Are you? Deeply. I don't like to think of you misled by those who may not grasp the delicacy of your situation. Lady Augusta smiled without warmth. Sir Malcolm, if you have discovered delicacy, I congratulate you on a late but dramatic conversion. His expression tightened for a fraction. Portia seized the pause. Rosamund, if you are innocent, say so plainly. Say you did not take the brooch. Say you are sorry this pain has come upon us all. There was the trap, laid in lace. If Rosamund denied too strongly, she would seem defensive. If she apologized, the apology would be shaped into confession before sunset. She felt every eye waiting to see which rope she chose. The door opened again. This time, no one needed the footman's announcement to understand the change in the room. Adrian Mowbray, Duke of Calder-wick, entered in dark blue, severe and immaculate, his presence so controlled that the space seemed to make itself orderly around him. He bowed to Lady Winborne first, then to Lady Augusta. Only after that did he look at Rosamund. He did not speak. His eyes asked a question. Do you require me? Rosamund's heart struck once. Not from fear. From the strange force of being offered help without being overtaken by it. She turned back to Portia. A woman with witnesses does not need to beg belief from those who arranged her silence. The drawing room fell silent so completely that the small clock on the mantel became audible. Lady Loxham's face lost a shade of colour beneath its powder. Sir Malcolm looked quickly toward Portia. Lady Barrington's cup stopped halfway to its saucer. The Duke remained where he was, but something in his expression altered, as if he had seen a blade drawn from a wound everyone else had mistaken for weakness. Lady Augusta said, Well, that was clear enough for tea. The absurd composure of it nearly shook a laugh from Rosamund, but her knees remembered fear a moment after her voice forgot it. She sat again with care. The Duke crossed the room then, not to stand over her, but near enough that the line was visible. No one could mistake where his protection lay. Lady Loxham noticed. So did everyone else. This grows theatrical, the Countess said. No, the Duke replied. It grows precise. A footman entered with a small salver and looked helplessly toward Lady Winborne. A note, my lady. It was left below for his grace. The Duke took it, broke the seal, and read. Nothing in his face moved, yet the air around him seemed to sharpen. He folded the paper once and placed it inside his coat. Rosamund watched him. Your Grace. He looked down at her, and for the first time that afternoon the controlled anger in his eyes became visible. It seems someone has grown impatient. What does it say? Across the room, Lady Loxham was speaking to Lady Barrington with serene composure. Lady Portia dabbed at her eyes. Sir Malcolm stood beside them both, smiling as if he had just heard music no one else could hear. The Duke lowered his voice. "Ask Miss Wren why the charity figures do not balance." Rosamund's fingers tightened around her untouched cup. The accusation changed shape in her hands. It was no longer only a brooch beneath a chair. It had found ink, accounts, charity, and a deeper hunger. "Miss Wren," the Duke said quietly, "do the figures balance?" She looked at him, then past him to Lady Loxham's perfect smile. "No," Rosamund said. "They never did." The first false entry looked like Rosamund's hand until she noticed it carried the wrong kind of courage. It was almost clever. Almost intimate. Whoever had made the figures had studied the slope of her letters, the neat restraint of her columns, the way she left a careful breath of space between one subscription and the next. Yet the imitation failed in two places so small that no one who had not lived inside those strokes would have seen them. The capital M closed at the middle like a gate. Rosamund never closed hers. Her mother had taught her to leave the first stroke open, so the word may breathe, and though Rosamund had not been allowed to keep the letters that held her mother's hand, she had kept that. The second mistake lay in the sevens. The false entries crossed them with short, confident bars. Rosamund's sevens stood plain. Lady Loxham had once called crossed sevens French affectation, and after that Rosamund had never risked them, not even in private household notes. She stood in the Duke's library at Calder-wick House with the ledger open beneath her hands, and for one strange moment the room seemed to tilt. The forged page was not only an attack upon her honesty. It was an imitation of her caution. Someone had watched the habits fear had taught her and used them as a mask. Mr. Tustall sat opposite her with Lady Winbourne's duplicate subscription summaries arranged in tidy piles. Lady Augusta occupied a chair by the hearth, pretending not to watch Rosamund too closely. The Duke stood near the long table, severe and silent, while late afternoon light fell across the accounts in pale strips. "This is not mine," Rosamund said. The words came quietly, but she felt the force of them travel through her body. "It resembles mine. It is meant to. But I would not write the M like that." Mr. Tustall leaned forward. "Show me." She pointed, then turned a page to one of her true entries. "Here. My M remains open at the center. Always. And here. The sevens. I was corrected for them years ago, and I do not forget corrections easily." Lady Augusta's eyes lifted. "No. Girls under Cordelia Loxham rarely do." The Duke's gaze moved from the ledger to Rosamund's face. "Who saw your hand often enough to imitate it?" "Everyone in that house who used me." She heard the bitterness and checked it before it grew large enough for shame. "Lady Loxham. Lady Portia. Mr. Vale's clerk when he came for copies. Sir Malcolm once, perhaps twice, when he sat in the writing room and pretended to look at sporting prints." Mr. Tustall marked the names. "The deficit is curious." "Curious?" Lady Augusta asked. "Not large enough to tempt a woman already in possession of influence. Not small enough to be ignored. It is precisely the sum that would destroy a dependent gentlewoman's reputation if attached to her hand." Rosamund looked at the page again. "Enough to make me look dishonest. Not enough to make anyone ask why Lady Loxham had not noticed sooner." The Duke's jaw hardened. "And if we reveal this now?" Mr. Tustall gathered two sheets together. "Lady Loxham will say Miss Wren altered accounts after fleeing her household, or that she now invents objections because she fears discovery. We need earlier copies, witnesses to the process, and a reason for the fraud beyond malice." "Money is usually reason enough," Lady Augusta said. "Money and vanity," Mr. Tustall replied. "But motive must be shown in a way society cannot politely misplace." Rosamund's fingers tightened at the edge of the table. The forger had made her small twice. First by accusing her of theft, then by making the proof speak in her own hand. The room blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the old habit of swallowing outrage before it became dangerous. The Duke noticed. He always noticed. "Miss Wren," he said, "step away from the ledger." The order might have stung if not for the way he said it, not as command, but as protection against the page itself. She moved to the hearth. The fire had been allowed to burn low, leaving heat without flame. Lady Augusta watched her over folded hands. You are allowed to be angry. Rosamund looked at the bandage hidden beneath her glove. Anger has never been useful to me. Then you were taught by people who found your patience profitable. A silence settled. The Duke crossed to a small side table and returned with a parcel wrapped in grey paper. He placed it beside Rosamund, not in her lap, not in her hand. Mrs. Bellamy found these among my aunt's stores. Rosamund opened the paper. Inside lay a pair of soft grey gloves, plain, well-made, and new. For a moment she could not speak. The gift should have been simple. Gloves covered wounds, warmed fingers, completed a lady's appearance. Yet the sight of them struck deeper than finery would have done. I cannot accept gifts from you, Your Grace. They are not from me. Lady Augusta raised one brow. Do not give him credit for my housekeeping. The Duke's mouth did not quite smile. You may wear them or not. You may keep them or return them. I only thought you should have the choice before another room decides what your hands may show. Rosamund touched the edge of the glove. Choice. The word had become almost frightening through repetition. Lady Loxham had made obedience feel safe because choice always carried threat. The Duke made choice feel heavier, but cleaner. Slowly, Rosamund removed the glove from her injured hand. The bandage had been changed, but beneath its edge the old scar showed, pale and curved near the wrist. Lady Augusta looked away first, granting privacy. Mr. Tustall busied himself with papers. The Duke did not look away, but neither did he stare. His gaze held steady upon the scar as if it deserved neither pity nor concealment. It was sealing wax, Rosamund said before anyone asked. When I was 16. Lady Portia wanted a letter sealed again before Lady Loxham saw that she had opened it. The wax spilled. She said it was an accident. Was it? The Duke asked. Rosamund let the question rest between them. No one was meant to ask. Something moved in his face, too restrained to be softness, too personal to be mere anger. I am asking now. The words touched a place the injury had not reached. Rosamund folded the new glove once, then laid it beside her rather than putting it on. Then no. I do not think it was an accident. I think she was angry that I would not say I had opened the letter. Lady Augusta's cane struck the carpet once. That child was always a polished little blade. Mr. Tustall looked up. If Lady Portia has a history of shifting blame onto Miss Wren, that supports motive, but it will not be enough. The clasp may, the Duke said. If there is one in the torn seam. Rosamund glanced toward the locked drawer where the torn ivory glove waited for proper examination. Not yet. We must not disturb it until witness is ready. The Duke inclined his head. As you said. He remembered. The simple fact of it unsettled her more than praise. Before the conversation could continue, Reeves entered with a salver bearing a cream envelope sealed in plum wax. From the Countess of Loxham, Your Grace. Delivered by her own man. The Duke took it, broke the seal, and read. His expression did not alter, which told Rosamund the contents were bad. Lady Loxham's charity musicale is tomorrow evening, he said. She writes that as Miss Wren once assisted with the accounts, her absence would be misunderstood by subscribers. She hopes Miss Wren will attend with suitable humility, so that unfortunate whispers of embezzlement do not harden into statements. Lady Augusta swore under her breath with such elegance that Mr. Tustall pretended deafness. Rosamund's injured wrist pulsed. There is more, the Duke said. He looked at her before reading it aloud, and in that pause she knew. She adds that certain letters belonging to your late mother remain safely in her cabinet, and that safety depends upon how carefully family honor is preserved. The room seemed to lose heat. Rosamund looked at the forged ledger, the new grey gloves, the sealed envelope, and the locked drawer where the torn ivory glove waited like a small, stubborn witness. Lady Loxham was not asking her to attend. She was summoning her to be accused again, this time before the very women whose subscriptions had been altered. The Duke said nothing, but the fury in his stillness was plain. Rosamund picked up the grey gloves. She did not put them on. Not yet. If I do not go, she said, she will say I am hiding from the accounts. Lady Augusta's voice was low. And if you go, she will try to make the accounts devour you. Rosamund looked at the open M on her true page, then at the false M closed like a gate. Then we must make certain I do not enter that room empty-handed. The Duke met her eyes across the table. No, he said. You will not. The charity musicale had been arranged to make accusations sound like virtue. Lady Loxham's drawing-room glittered with candles, gilt chairs, polished instruments, and the soft rustle of women who had come prepared to praise benevolence while studying scandal over the rims of their teacups. A harp stood near the windows. A young soprano waited beside the pianoforte, her music folded in trembling hands. On every small table lay printed lists of subscribers to the Loxham Widows' Relief Fund, each sheet tied with pale ribbon and stamped with the Countess's crest. Rosamund understood the room the instant she entered it. This was not a performance for charity. It was a stage built around her expected disgrace. She came with Lady Augusta Mowbray at her side, wearing her plain grey gown and the new grey gloves Lady Augusta had insisted were now part of her employment, not a gift. The injured wrist still ached beneath the soft leather. She had wanted to carry the torn ivory glove, but Mr. Tustall had advised that its seam remain untouched until witnessed. The Duke had agreed. That was sensible. It also meant Rosamund entered the room without the one object that had first told the truth. Adrian Mowbray stood near the far wall, dark, composed, and watched by everyone pretending not to watch him. He had arrived separately, which propriety required. His gaze found hers at once, and for a brief second, the room narrowed to the small question in his eyes. Are you steady? Rosamund gave the slightest nod. She was not steady. She was standing, which would have to serve. Lady Loxham approached with a smile of tragic forgiveness. Rosamund, how good of you to come. It proves, I hope, that you understand the importance of keeping charity above personal distress. Charity should always be kept above personal use, Rosamund replied. Lady Augusta's cane touched the floor once in approval. Lady Loxham's smile tightened. How very earnest you have become. Lady Portia drifted close behind her mother in pale rose silk, without the blue gloves and without the sapphire brooch. Her throat looked deliberately bare. I only want tonight to mend matters, she said softly. We've all suffered. Rosamund looked at her unmarked wrists. Some wounds are easier to choose than others. Portia's eyes hardened, then filled almost instantly as Lady Barrington turned toward them. It was skill, Rosamund thought, not feeling. The music began before she could say more. The soprano sang of mercy, widowhood, and heavenly reward. The audience listened with lowered eyes and visible virtue. Rosamund sat beside Lady Augusta and counted the exits, the faces, the tables where subscription lists had been placed. Sir Malcolm Fane stood near the pianoforte, speaking to two elderly gentlemen with the subdued gravity of a man already practicing sorrow on her behalf. Twice, he glanced toward her. Twice, he made certain she saw him do it. After the final song, Lady Loxham rose. She did not ask for attention. She assumed it, and the room obeyed. My friends, she said, this little gathering was meant to honor those ladies whose generosity has softened the hardships of women less fortunate than ourselves. I regret that recent events have made it necessary to address a painful matter. A current moved through the room. Rosamund felt it reach for her. Lady Augusta's hand, gloved in black, rested on the head of her cane. The Duke's posture did not change, but his attention sharpened like a drawn line. Lady Loxham accepted a packet from a footman. As many of you know, my young relation, Miss Wren, assisted me with correspondence and accounts connected to this fund. I trusted her. Perhaps too much. Lady Winbourne gave a faint sound. Lady Barrington leaned forward. Portia covered her mouth with one hand. Lady Loxham unfolded 3 ledger sheets. Rosamund knew before seeing them that the capital M would be wrong. She knew the 7s would be crossed. Her body remembered the insult before her eyes confirmed it. Certain figures, Lady Loxham continued, do not balance. I had hoped to correct them quietly, but when a missing brooch and irregular accounts appear in such close company, silence becomes difficult. The room did what rooms had done around Rosamund all her life. It made a place for her guilt before she had spoken. Sir Malcolm stepped forward with a grave expression. My lady, forgive me. I cannot stand by while a gentlewoman's name is torn beyond repair. Rosamund heard the word torn and felt her wrist pulse. Sir Malcolm turned toward her. Miss Wren, I have already made known to Lady Loxham my willingness to offer you my protection. If confusion, fear, or bad counsel has led you into distress, marriage may yet restore what gossip would destroy. A soft collective breath rose from the patronesses. There it was. The white ribbon around the noose. Lady Loxham lowered her eyes as though overcome by the nobility of the offer. Portia began to cry. Lady Barrington murmured, very generous. Rosamund rose. No, the word was not loud, but it cut cleanly through the room. Sir Malcolm's face tightened. You are overwrought. It's understandable. No, she said again. You do not offer protection. You offer ownership disguised as rescue. Lady Loxham lifted the ledger sheets. Rosamund, this is not the hour for pride. It is exactly the hour for it. A murmur broke out. The Duke moved then, swift enough that several ladies drew back, controlled enough that no one could accuse him of disorder. He crossed to Lady Loxham and took one of the sheets only when she had no graceful way to refuse him. His eyes moved over the writing. Rosamund saw him find the M. Then the 7. He knew. But knowledge was not proof. Not yet. Lady Loxham knew that too. Your Grace, she said, I appreciate your concern, but this is a committee matter. A committee matter does not require a marriage proposal, he said. Sir Malcolm stiffened. I have behaved honorably. The Duke looked at him. That remains under review. The room tightened. Rosamund took one step forward, ready to speak, ready to name the false hand, the wrong M, the crossed 7, the settlement Sir Malcolm wanted, and the mother's letters Lady Loxham kept behind a locked door. Before she could begin, the Duke turned toward her. His voice lowered. Miss Wren, go with Lady Augusta. Now. She stared at him. Your Grace. His eyes held urgency, not contempt. The evidence is not ready. They want you provoked before witnesses who have already been fed their conclusion. Leave the room. I will handle this. He meant to shield her. She could hear it. She could see the calculation and fear beneath his composure. If she stayed and faltered, the room would devour her. If she spoke without proof, Lady Loxham would call it hysteria, Sir Malcolm would call it desperation, and the patronesses would call it pity. The Duke saw a battlefield and tried to remove her from the line of fire. But the room had named her. The room had heard the accusation. To leave now was to let her silence become another document against her. Lady Augusta rose beside her. Adrian. There was warning in the older woman's voice, but the Duke did not look away from Rosamund. Please, he said, too quietly for the room to hear. That word nearly undid her. He was not ordering as a tyrant. He was pleading as a protector. Yet the result was the same. Her truth would be carried out of the room like a fainting woman, and men would decide how much of it could survive propriety. Rosamund looked at Lady Loxham, who watched with barely hidden satisfaction. Portia's tears had stopped too quickly. Sir Malcolm's mouth curved by a fraction. They understood the damage even if the Duke did not. Rosamund inclined her head. As your Grace wishes. He flinched. No one else noticed. Lady Augusta took Rosamund's arm and guided her from the drawing room before the silence could harden. In the corridor, the music room doors closed behind them, muffling the renewed whispers into a dull sea. Rosamund pulled her hand free. Lady Augusta did not stop her. A few feet away, the Duke emerged, having followed sooner than society would expect and later than Rosamund needed. Miss Wren, he began. She turned on him, not with rage, but with a steadiness that cost more. You saw the false hand. Yes. You knew Sir Malcolm's offer was a trap. Yes. And when I was ready to answer it, you sent me away. His face tightened. I could not let them tear you apart with half-proof. They were already tearing me apart. I meant to protect you. I know. That was the part that hurt. You are kinder than they are, Your Grace. But if you make my truth into your strategy, it is still no longer mine. The words struck him harder than accusation would have done. For a moment, The cold Duke of Calder-wick looked simply like a man who had reached for the right thing and closed his hand around the wrong one. Lady Augusta looked between them, saying nothing. Rosamund drew a breath. "I cannot remain in your house if I must ask permission to speak when my name is being taken from me." "Where will you go?" the Duke asked. The question came out rougher than before. "Mrs. Arden in Bloomsbury. She was my mother's friend. Lady Augusta may write if she is willing, and I will go with a maid and every propriety intact." Lady Augusta's eyes softened. "I will write." The Duke stood very still. Rosamund saw the battle in him, command against consent, fear against respect. At last he bowed. "Then I will not prevent you." It was the hardest courtesy he had offered her yet. Rosamund looked once toward the closed doors, where Lady Loxham's victory was being arranged in murmurs. Then she turned toward the stairs. Behind her, the Duke said nothing. That silence told her he had finally understood the cost of speaking too late. By midnight, Rosamund left Calder-wick House under Lady Augusta's protection, not as a woman abandoned, but as one who had chosen the place from which she would fight. Elsie had vanished before Rosamund could save her. That was the first news waiting in Mrs. Arden's narrow Bloomsbury parlour the morning after Rosamund left Calder-wick House, and it struck harder than any fresh rumour from Mayfair. Mrs. Arden stood beside the breakfast table with 2 folded notes in her hand and the composed sorrow of a woman who had lived long enough to distrust coincidences. She had been Rosamund's mother's dearest friend before marriage, widowhood, and reduced means turned friendship into letters sent less often and remembered more painfully. Her house was small, respectable, and warm with books that had been read rather than displayed. There were no footmen lining the walls, no glittering chandeliers, no silk chairs positioned to make a poor relation feel poorer. Yet Rosamund felt no safety in it that morning. Elsie was gone. "Dismissed?" she asked. "Not exactly." Mrs. Arden handed her the first note. "A kitchen maid from Lady Loxham's household told my charwoman that Elsie was sent out yesterday with a parcel and did not return to her usual duties. This morning, her trunk was removed from the servants' room. No one below stairs was told whether she had been discharged, transferred, or sent to an aunt. She has no aunt in London." Rosamund read the line again, though it did not change. Her bandaged wrist ached beneath her glove. "The parcel. Do we know where she took it?" Mrs. Arden gave her the second note. "A glove mender near St. James's Street. Mrs. Peake. She does work for ladies who prefer repairs to be invisible and invoices to be discreet." Rosamund's breath caught. Pale blue gloves. Sapphire clasps at Portia's wrists. The sharp pinch when Portia seized her. The old seam splitting beneath a hard little edge. "The morning after the dinner," Rosamund said. "They sent the gloves to be altered before anyone could notice a missing clasp." Mrs. Arden watched her carefully. "You need not go yourself." Rosamund folded the note. "Yes, I do. A duke's carriage would open doors. It would also close mouths." The words came sharper than she intended, and shame followed at once. Mrs. Arden only nodded. "Then we go as women with errands, not as scandal looking for a witness." They went before noon in a hired carriage, with Mrs. Arden's maid beside them and every propriety observed. The glove mender's shop stood between a milliner and a stationer, narrow enough that the bell above the door sounded offended by company. Mrs. Peake was a spare woman with silver-threaded hair, keen eyes, and hands so clean they looked carved from discipline. She knew Mrs. Arden by sight and Rosamund by rumour. Rosamund saw the knowledge in the woman's hesitation before she curtsied. "I cannot speak of customers' garments," Mrs. Peake said before Rosamund had finished giving Lady Portia's name. "I keep a respectable shop." "I am not asking you to betray a customer for gossip," Rosamund replied. "I am asking whether a maid may lose her character because she carried a parcel someone else wished hidden." Mrs. Peake's mouth tightened. "Maidservants lose characters every day, miss. The world has not yet stopped for it." "No. But it may pause for one." Mrs. Arden stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Peake, you mended gloves for my sister before I married. You once refused payment because she had lost her purse and you said a lady's hands should not suffer for a thief's convenience. I remember it because kindness done quietly lasts longer than the loud sort. The mender looked down at her counter. For a moment, Rosamund thought she would still refuse. Then Mrs. Peake went to a drawer and withdrew a narrow ledger. She did not hand it over. She laid it on the counter and kept one finger on the page, as if even paper could be endangered by truth. "Pale blue kid gloves," she said. "Received from Loxham House the morning after the dinner. Cuffs to be shortened by 1/2 inch. One sapphire clasp missing." The maid said Lady Portia had torn it loose on a chair. Rosamund felt the shop tilt around that sentence. "Did you see the missing clasp?" "No. Only the empty setting. I was told to remove the other clasp and replace both cuffs with pearl buttons." "Can you say this before witnesses?" Mrs. Peake looked toward the window, where 2 ladies passed under umbrellas. "Not today. Mrs. Peake," Mrs. Arden said gently. "If I anger the Countess of Loxham, I lose more than one customer. Ladies follow ladies. A shop survives by being trusted with small vanities and large secrets." Rosamund understood fear when she saw it. She had no right to despise another woman for protecting her livelihood. "Then do not swear anything today," she said. "Let me remember the entry. Let me know Elsie did not invent the parcel." Mrs. Peake's eyes returned to her. The girl was frightened. She kept looking behind her. She asked whether a missing clasp could be sewn back if found later. "I told her yes, if the teeth were not broken." Rosamund's heart gave one hard beat. Teeth! The little prongs that fasten the stone setting. If one caught in leather, it might hold. Rosamund saw again the torn ivory seam, tight as a wound around a secret. She thanked Mrs. Peake, not warmly enough to trap her, not coldly enough to punish her. By the time they returned to Bloomsbury, the city had darkened with rain. In Mrs. Arden's parlour, a visitor waited with the door open, Reeve standing discreetly in the hall and Lady Augusta's maid seated by the window like a human guarantee of propriety. Adrian Mowbray rose when Rosamund entered. He looked as though the night had not been kind to him, though his coat was flawless and his face controlled. On the table lay a packet tied with black ribbon. He did not reach for her. He did not ask where she had been as though he owned the answer. "Miss Wren," he said. "Mrs. Arden allowed me to wait because I brought papers, not commands." Mrs. Arden removed her bonnet. "A sensible distinction. I shall remain close enough to rescue either of you from foolishness." She sat with her sewing near the window, leaving them a privacy made of witnesses. The Duke looked at Rosamund. "I was wrong last night." She held herself still. An apology from a powerful man could still become an argument if one was not careful. "About the evidence." "About you." The answer silenced her. "I understood the room. I understood the danger. I understood strategy. I did not understand that removing you from the attack gave them the silence they wanted. I protected your reputation as if it could be separated from your voice." Rosamund's throat tightened. She wanted to forgive him at once. She did not. Instant forgiveness could become another kind of obedience. "You hurt me," she said. His face changed, not dramatically, but enough. "I know. You meant to save me. That does not lessen it." She looked at the packet. "What did you bring?" "Duplicate subscription summaries from Lady Winbourne. Notes from Mr. Tustall regarding Mr. Vale's inquiries into your settlement. Nothing will be used unless you decide how." He placed his hand flat on the packet, then drew it back, leaving it untouched between them. "I am done mistaking possession of evidence for possession of truth." Rosamund sat slowly. The words did not erase the corridor outside the music-hall. They did open a door in it. Mrs. Peake confirmed Portia's gloves were altered the morning after dinner. One sapphire clasp was missing. The Duke's eyes sharpened. "Will she witness it?" "Not yet. She is afraid." Understandably. Elsie carried the parcel. She asked whether a clasp could be sewn back if found later. He drew a slow breath. "Then the torn glove must be examined." "Yes. But not by you alone." "Not by me alone." "Agreed. Mr. Tustall, Lady Winbourne, and Mrs. Bellamy can witness the seam." He paused. "The glove remains locked at Calder-wick House. Untouched." Relief moved through her so quickly it almost weakened her. "Thank you. Do not thank me for preserving what I had no right to alter. Before she could answer, Reeves appeared at the parlor door with a note. The Duke read it and passed it to Rosamund without comment. Mrs. Bellamy had found Elsie. The girl was safe for the present, hidden with a cousin of Mrs. Bellamy's housemaid, but terrified of speaking publicly. She would not swear before a room of ladies unless promised she would not be forced beyond what she could bear. Rosamund closed her eyes for 1 second. Good, she whispered. She is alive to choose. The Duke watched her with a look she could not name. Respect, perhaps. Regret. Something quieter than either. Lady Augusta proposes a private meeting of patronesses and subscribers at Calder-wick House, he said. Not a court. A committee review. Lady Loxham cannot refuse without looking afraid of inquiry. Rosamund touched the edge of Mrs. Peake's note in her reticule. The clasp may expose Portia. Yes. The ledger may expose the false hand. Yes. She lifted her eyes to his. But we still do not have the piece that proves Lady Loxham meant to profit from both. The Duke did not soften the truth. Not yet. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of Mrs. Arden's small parlor. Inside, Rosamund looked at the packet, the notes, and the man who had come not to carry her truth, but to place it back within her reach. The trap had not opened. Lady Loxham still held the letters, the ledger, and the greater lie. But somewhere in the torn seam of an old ivory glove, a sapphire clasp might be waiting with its teeth still caught in the truth. By the time Calder-wick House opened its drawing room for the private review, every chair had been placed with the precision of a statement. It was not a court, and Lady Augusta Mowbray had made certain no one could call it one. There was no raised bench, no dramatic arrangement, no air of public punishment. There were only subscribers, patronesses, witnesses, a solicitor, a locked writing box, and a long table set beneath the tall windows where documents could be examined without anyone pretending they were merely conversation. That made the room more dangerous. A scandal could be dismissed as emotion. A committee review, properly attended and properly witnessed, could survive in ink. Rosamund arrived from Mrs. Arden's Bloomsbury house with Mrs. Arden beside her and Lady Augusta's maid following at a correct distance. She wore a dark grey gown without ornament, her hair simply dressed, her right wrist covered by the soft grey glove she had chosen herself. In her reticule lay the torn ivory glove, now removed from Calder-wick's locked drawer and placed there in the presence of Mr. Tustell, Lady Winbourne, and Mrs. Bellamy. No one had loosened the seam until all three had watched. No one had spoken when the small sapphire clasp appeared from the inner fold, its tiny prongs still caught in the torn leather like a secret that had bitten too deep to escape. Rosamund had not wept then. She had only looked at it until the room steadied. Now, standing in the drawing-room where Lady Loxham had been summoned by courtesy and trapped by her own reputation, Rosamund felt the weight of that glove beside her hand as if it had a pulse. Adrian Mowbray stood near the table, dark and composed, speaking quietly with Mr. Tustell. He looked toward her when she entered. He did not come at once. First, he let her cross the room under her own power. Only when she reached the table did he bow. "Miss Wren." "Your Grace." His eyes lowered briefly to the reticule. "Mr. Tustell can present the glove if you wish." The offer was careful. It held no pressure inside it. That was how she knew he had learned. "No," she said. "I will." His face did not change, but something in his stillness eased. "Then I shall not speak unless you ask, or unless someone attempts to prevent you. And if I falter, I will wait first." The answer moved through her more deeply than a vow would have done. "Thank you." Lady Augusta approached with her cane, looking magnificent and merciless in black silk. "They have accepted. Cordelia cannot refuse a review of her own charity without admitting she fears arithmetic. Lady Portia comes with her. Sir Malcolm has invited himself, which saves us the trouble of fetching Vanity by the collar." Mrs. Arden adjusted one glove. "Elsie?" Rosamund asked. "In the small anteroom with Mrs. Bellamy," Lady Augusta replied. "She knows she may speak only as much as she chooses. I have told her no lady in this house will purchase truth with terror." Rosamund closed her eyes for a breath. Good. The first guests arrived within minutes. Lady Winbourne entered pale but determined, clutching her own copies of the subscription summaries. Lady Barrington followed with 2 other patronesses and the expression of a woman who had decided to be shocked only after seeing which side shock would favour. Then came Lady Loxham, all controlled sorrow in deep mourning silk, with Lady Portia beside her in a gown of faint blue that made Rosamund's stomach tighten before reason returned. Portia's gloves were white again, fastened with pearl buttons. Rosamund looked at them and saw, not absence, but confirmation. Last came Sir Malcolm Fane, polished, grave, and too certain that a room of ladies would confuse smoothness with honour. Lady Loxham greeted Lady Augusta as though they had gathered to discuss a seating mishap. "I had hoped, dear Lady Augusta, that so painful a matter might be spared further airing." "Then you should not have hung it in every drawing-room in Mayfair," Lady Augusta replied. Lady Loxham's smile thinned. Sir Malcolm moved before the formalities could settle. He approached Rosamund near the table, bowing low enough to make refusal look unkind. "Miss Wren, may I have a word before this becomes uglier than necessary?" Mrs. Arden shifted, but Rosamund lifted a hand. "You may speak here." His eyes flicked toward the others. "You persist in mistaking pride for strength. I don't wish to see you broken by people who enjoy spectacle. My offer remains. Marriage would end this before worse accusations fasten themselves to your name. Marriage to you would end my name before the accusations finished their work." His mouth tightened. "You are not in a position to be disdainful. I am in precisely that position." Her voice remained low, but he heard the edge. "A proposal offered as a chain is another theft." Colour rose along Sir Malcolm's cheekbones. "You will regret refusing protection." "I have regretted accepting the wrong kind." Behind him, the Duke had gone very still. He did not intervene. He let the refusal stand in her voice, not his. That silence steadied her more than defence would have done. Mr. Tustall called the room to order with a solicitor's dry courtesy. "Ladies, Sir Malcolm, we are gathered to clarify 3 connected matters. The accusation concerning Lady Portia's brooch, the handling of certain charity accounts, and the circumstances under which Miss Wren's name has been used." Lady Loxham sat with perfect composure. "Clarify is a generous word. I hope we are not to witness a performance built upon resentment." Rosamund turned toward the table. Her fingers brushed the reticule. Before she could open it, Portia came close enough that only she could hear. "If you do this," Portia whispered, "Mamma will burn them before nightfall." Rosamund did not look at her. "Burn what?" "The letters. Your mother's precious letters. The ones you kept begging for with those wounded eyes. You think Calder-wick can protect paper in our cabinet? Speak today, and you'll never read a word." For a second, sound dropped out of the room. Rosamund was no longer in Calder-wick House. She was 13 again, standing outside Lady Loxham's writing room while the Countess unfolded one page and allowed her to see only the greeting. "My dearest Rosamund." Then the paper had vanished back into the drawer, love turned into a reward she had not earned. Her hand tightened around the reticule clasp. If she spoke, she might lose the last living trace of her mother's hand. If she stayed silent, Lady Loxham would keep it anyway, and every silence after this one would be purchased with the same threat. Across the table, Adrian saw her waver. His eyes asked the question he had learned not to answer for her. "Do you ask me to speak?" Rosamund breathed once. Then again. She thought of Elsie in the anteroom, afraid but not forced. She thought of Mrs. Peake's ledger, Lady Winbourne's trembling courage, the false M closed like a gate, and the small blue clasp hidden inside the torn seam. She thought of her mother, not as a packet behind a locked door, but as the woman who had taught her letters should breathe. Rosamund looked at Portia at last. "Then you have mistaken what a mother's words are for." Portia blinked. "What?" "They are not a leash." Rosamund turned away from her and faced the room. Her voice was not loud, but every head lifted. "Before the accounts," she said, placing her reticule on the table, "we shall begin with the glove." Lady Loxham's expression did not change quickly enough to hide the first flicker of fear. Rosamund opened the reticule and drew out the torn ivory glove. The room leaned toward it, unwilling and unable to look away. She laid it flat upon the table, the ripped seam visible, the small sapphire clasp caught in the fold where Portia's hand had left more than pain behind. This, Rosamund said, was torn at Lady Loxham's dinner table when Lady Portia seized my wrist and demanded my reticule. I was called a thief before anyone searched the room. I was injured before anyone proved a theft. And now, before any lady here is asked to believe another ledger page, I ask only one question. She lifted her eyes to Portia. If you never touched me that night, why is the missing sapphire clasp from your glove caught in the torn seam of mine? For one terrible heartbeat, Lady Portia Wren forgot to look innocent. Her face did not crumple. It emptied. The tears she had kept ready for sympathy did not fall, and the delicate sorrow she wore so well slipped just far enough for every woman in the room to see the calculation beneath it. Then she reached for outrage, as she always had, quick as a hand snatching lace over a stain. That is absurd, she said. A clasp may be caught anywhere. Gloves pass through maids' hands, laundresses' hands, menders' hands. You cannot make a crime out of a loose ornament. Rosamund stood with the torn ivory glove between them, her own gloved fingers resting lightly on the table edge. She could feel Adrian near the end of the table, silent as he had promised. He did not move forward. He did not rescue the question from her mouth by making it grander in his. That silence gave her room to continue. A loose ornament did not walk into the seam by itself, she said. It lodged in the glove at the point where the leather tore. That point was at my wrist. That tear happened while you held me before the dinner table. Portia's chin lifted. You were struggling to be released. Because you feared a search. Because I feared exactly what has followed. Lady Loxham rose by a fraction, her morning silk whispering like a warning. Rosamund, you forget yourself. Rosamund turned to her. No, Lady Loxham. That has been the difficulty. I am beginning to remember myself too clearly for your comfort. A faint movement stirred among the patronesses. Lady Barrington's fan lowered. Lady Winbourne pressed one hand to her throat, not in performance this time, but in recognition of a courage she had almost failed to show. Sir Malcolm's expression had tightened into distaste, as if plain truth were an unpleasant household odor. Mr. Tustall stepped forward with a folded paper. If I may, Lady Augusta. Lady Augusta inclined her head. Proceed. This is the entry from Mrs. Peake, glove mender of St. James's Street, copied in my presence this morning from her trade ledger. Pale blue kid gloves, received from Loxham House on the morning after the dinner. Cuffs shortened by ½ inch. One sapphire clasp missing. Remaining clasp removed and both cuffs finished with pearl buttons. Portia gave a small laugh, too high and too brittle. Amenda's entry proves nothing except that I had gloves altered. No, Rosamund said. It proves you altered the very gloves you wore when you tore mine. I wore several pairs that week. Not at the dinner. Portia looked toward her mother. Lady Loxham's face was perfectly still, but the stillness no longer commanded. It waited. That waiting frightened Portia more visibly than accusation. Mr. Tustall laid the copied entry beside the glove. Mrs. Peake is not yet willing to appear before a room of patronesses. Her concern for her trade is understandable. But the entry exists, and it was made before she knew the clasp had been found in Miss Wren's glove. Lady Augusta spoke then, crisp and cold. Fear of a countess is not proof against truth. It is merely proof that the countess has been feared. Lady Loxham's eyes flashed. Take care, Lady Augusta. At my age, threats need to arrive with better posture. A strained silence followed. Rosamund did not smile. The room would have liked humor to soften the edge of what had been shown. She would not permit it to become charming. There is another witness, she said. A small sound came from the side door. Mrs. Bellamy entered with Elsie beside her. The maid looked younger outside the shelter of routine, her cap plain, her hands twisted in her apron, her eyes fixed on the carpet as if rank itself might strike from above. Rosamund's chest tightened. She wanted to go to her. She did not. Elsie deserved to stand without being made an exhibit of rescue. Elsie, Rosamund said gently, you do not have to speak more than you choose. Elsie looked up at that. The room watched her discover that permission could be given to a servant and meant. I carried the gloves, miss, she whispered. Mrs. Bellamy remained beside her, steady as an oak door. Lady Loxham's voice sharpened. The girl is confused. Elsie flinched. Rosamund saw it, and so did the Duke. He took one step, no more. The movement was enough to make the Countess stop. Elsie swallowed. Lady Portia gave me a parcel the morning after the dinner. She said I was to take it to Mrs. Peake and wait. She said if I told anyone, I'd be dismissed without character for prying into a lady's wardrobe. Portia's face went scarlet. I never said that. Elsie's hands shook, but her voice steadied by the width of a thread. You did, my lady. You said servants who talk soon learn how wide London is when no door opens. Lady Winbourne gave a soft cry. Lady Barrington looked away from Portia for the first time and toward the maid. There was no sentiment in the look, only the dawning discomfort of a woman who had heard a servant quoted clearly enough to become real. Mrs. Bellamy said, Elsie will have a proper character from this house and a place if she chooses it. Her safety is not for sale. Lady Loxham turned on her. You presume a great deal for a housekeeper. Mrs. Bellamy curtsied. Only what my master has already authorized. The Duke's voice entered the room, low and exact. And what I will stand by. He said no more. Rosamund felt the force of that restraint. He had protected Elsie without taking the centre from her. Portia's eyes darted from the Duke to her mother, then to Sir Malcolm, whose sympathy seemed to have developed a sudden interest in the carpet. Elsie disliked me, Portia said. Servants invent things. Servants remember what ladies assume they may forget, Rosamund replied. Lady Winbourne stood abruptly, startling herself. I can confirm the reticule remained in my keeping after the dinner. It was sealed in my house and returned to Calder-wick House untouched. The brooch was not found in it. Her voice trembled, but it carried. And I saw Lady Portia seize Miss Wren's wrist. I did not speak then. I should have. I speak now. Lady Loxham closed her eyes for the briefest instant. It was enough. The room saw loss pass over her face. Not grief for Rosamund. Not shame. Calculation broken before completion. Portia's mouth wavered. Mamma, I didn't mean for it to go so far. The sentence fell into the room with more force than a confession shouted. Lady Loxham opened her eyes. Portia. Her daughter recoiled from the single word. I only wanted her frightened, Portia said, the words rushing now because fear had made silence impossible. She had become impossible. Answering back. Looking at me as though I was cruel. I wanted her to learn her place. The brooch was supposed to make her apologize. The glove tore because she pulled away. Rosamund looked at the woman who had once spilled sealing wax on her wrist and called it accident. Portia was crying now, truly perhaps, but not for the wound she had caused. She cried because consequence had touched her. You wanted me frightened and silent, Rosamund said. You did not care whether the lie outgrew your intention. Portia covered her face. Lady Barrington rose and moved away from her chair as though distance could cleanse association. Lady Winbourne sat down hard, pale but upright. The other patronesses began murmuring behind lowered voices, not with pity for Rosamund this time, but with the alarm of women realizing they had nearly lent their names to a prepared disgrace. Sir Malcolm spoke at last. A childish spite concerning a glove does not answer the matter of the accounts. His voice was smooth again, but sweat shone faintly at his temple. Nor does it prove Lady Loxham's knowledge of anything. Lady Loxham seized the opening with a dignity worn thin at the edges. Precisely. My daughter behaved foolishly and will be corrected within the family. But a clasp cannot account for missing charity funds. A wounded wrist cannot balance a ledger. Rosamund turned back to the table. The torn glove lay open beneath the candles, no longer shameful, no longer small. The sapphire clasp glittered in its ripped seam, a blue spark that had survived Portia's haste, Lady Loxham's command, and Rosamund's own fear. No, Rosamund said. A clasp cannot balance a ledger. She looked from Portia to Lady Loxham, then to Sir Malcolm. But it can show who first needed me ruined. The room changed again. The accusation had not ended. It had found its true beginning. Lady Loxham turned from the torn glove as though the sapphire clasp were a childish inconvenience and not the first nail in the door she had built around Rosamund. "Enough," she said. Her voice had regained its polish, but not its ease. "My daughter has behaved unwisely. I will address it within my household. But charity funds remain missing, and Miss Wren's hand appears upon the disputed entries. If this room is interested in justice rather than sentiment, we must return to the accounts." "Gladly," Rosamund said. The word was so calm that Lady Loxham looked at her more sharply than if she had cried out. Mr. Tustall placed the ledger upon the table and opened it to the marked pages. Beside it, he laid Lady Winborne's duplicate summaries, the copies Rosamund had made before the figures changed, and 2 letters sealed by gentlemen who had no connection to Calder-wick House. "For clarity," he said, "we shall not discuss every column. Only the 2 places where the truth ceases to resemble itself." Rosamund stepped nearer. The old instinct to defer rose and failed. She touched the true summary first. "This is mine. The capital M is open at the center. My mother taught me that letter before I could read whole sentences. I write it this way always." She moved her finger to the ledger entry Lady Loxham had brought to the music-hall. "This is not mine. The M closes like a gate." Lady Barrington leaned forward despite herself. Lady Winborne drew a soft breath. Rosamund continued. "The 7s here are crossed. I do not cross mine. Lady Loxham corrected me for it when I was 14. I remember corrections from her house very well." A few eyes moved toward the Countess. Lady Loxham's lips tightened. Any schoolroom girl might alter such details after being warned. "Yes," Rosamund said. "If she altered them afterward." But Lady Winborne's summaries were in her keeping before the dinner accusation. Her copies show the earlier totals. The disputed deficits appear only in the ledger pages Lady Loxham controlled. Mr. Tustall placed a letter beside the ledger. Lady Winborne confirms that these summaries were received by her before Miss Wren left Loxham House. Lady Barrington, you received a similar subscription list last month. Lady Barrington paled. I did. You will find your copy matches Lady Winborne's, not the altered ledger. Lady Barrington looked at Lady Loxham as if a chair had vanished beneath her. Cordelia. Lady Loxham lifted her chin. Errors happen in charitable work. Miss Wren was careless. Careless enough to steal a brooch, forge accounts, and then leave the proofs in places convenient to you. Lady Augusta asked. That is a busy incompetence. Sir Malcolm moved toward the table. This is becoming personal. A young woman trained in accounts could easily change figures and then accuse others of doing so. Miss Wren had every reason to fear discovery. And you had every reason to desire it, the Duke said. He had spoken little, but when his voice entered the room, it altered the pressure of the air. Mr. Tustall unfolded another paper. Sir Malcolm Fane's creditors have lately pressed for payment. 2 notes fall due within the month. Further, Mr. Vale, solicitor to Lady Loxham, made inquiry concerning Miss Wren's settlement 3 days before the dinner at which the brooch disappeared. Sir Malcolm's face changed. It happened quickly, but not quickly enough. Lady Loxham's head turned toward him. Malcolm. The warning in her voice was too familiar. Sir Malcolm heard abandonment in it and chose injury over loyalty. Do not take that tone with me, Cordelia. You said the matter would be simple. The room stilled. Portia, still flushed from her own exposure, stared at him with naked alarm. Lady Loxham went white beneath her powder. You mistake yourself. No. I mistook you. A little pressure, you said. A dependent girl with no reputation left. A grateful bride with no other path. You assured me the settlement would be accessible once the marriage was arranged. The words fell one by one, too plain to be called gossip. Mr. Tustall began writing at once. Lady Augusta's eyes were cold with satisfaction. Vanity is often the first witness to betray a conspiracy. Sir Malcolm looked around, realizing too late that the room was no longer arranged to admire him. I offered respectability. Rosamund faced him. You offered a locked door and called it shelter. He had no answer to that. Lady Loxham rose fully now, abandoning tenderness, grief, and every softer costume. You all speak as if society is run on pretty feeling. It is not. A girl without fortune must be placed. A household must be preserved. A family name must be guarded. Rosamund was fed, housed, and protected. She owed obedience. The words should have wounded. They had been designed over years for that purpose. Yet Rosamund heard them now as others heard them, stripped of elegance. You did not protect me, she said. You used my work without wage, kept my mother's letters as reward and threat, offered my future to a man who wanted my settlement, and called me thief when ruin became useful. Lady Loxham's fingers closed over the back of her chair. You ungrateful girl. No, Rosamund said. I was grateful for bread when I was hungry. That does not make the hand that held it over me kind. Lady Winborne stood. Her face trembled, but her voice carried. I withdraw my subscription from the Loxham Widows' Relief Fund until trustees unconnected with Lady Loxham review the accounts. Lady Barrington rose after a strained pause. As do I. And I cannot, in conscience, continue discussions concerning Lady Portia and my nephew. Portia made a small sound and sat down as if her strength had gone with the words. Another patroness added her name. Then another. Mr. Tustall placed a clean sheet upon the desk, and one by one, the women signed. It was not loud. That made it more final. Patronage did not always die in scandal. Sometimes it died in ink. The Duke turned to Mr. Tustall. Mr. Vale is to receive notice that Miss Wren's settlement is under immediate review. No claim, marriage arrangement, or transfer is to proceed without independent examination. Already drafted, Your Grace. And Lady Loxham will return the letters belonging to Miss Wren's mother by tomorrow morning through your office. Lady Loxham's eyes flashed. They were placed in my care. Then you will relieve yourself of the burden, the Duke said. If you do not, this room will receive a written statement that you retained a daughter's private inheritance of memory while using it to command her silence. For the first time, Lady Loxham looked truly afraid. Not of prison. Not of law. Of being known exactly. Elsie stood near Mrs. Bellamy, crying silently now that she no longer had to speak. Rosamund crossed to her. She did not make a display of comfort. She only said, You did enough. Elsie whispered, Will I have a place, miss? Mrs. Bellamy answered before anyone else could use mercy as a performance. You will have a proper character and a place where honesty is not punished. The Duke added, This house stands behind that. Elsie curtsied, shaking, but her eyes lifted from the carpet. The room began to dissolve after that, not into chaos, but into consequence. Lady Loxham departed without offering farewell. Lady Portia followed her mother, pale and small in a way that had nothing to do with innocence. Sir Malcolm demanded his hat with too much volume and received it from a footman who looked through him as if baronets had become weather. The patronesses took their signed statements, their altered loyalties, and the truth out into Mayfair. When the doors closed at last, Rosamund remained beside the table with the torn glove, the ledger, and the paper that would bring back her mother's letters. Her hand had begun to tremble. Adrian saw it and did not reach for her until she looked at him. Miss Wren, he said, and the formal address felt more intimate for the respect inside it. Before any private word is spoken, I owe you a public one. Lady Augusta, Mrs. Arden, Mr. Tustall, Mrs. Bellamy, Lady Winborne, and Lady Barrington remained. He faced them all. At the musicale, I believed I was protecting Miss Wren by removing her from a hostile room. I was wrong. I treated her truth as something to be managed by my judgment. It was not mine to manage. Her dignity was never mine to restore, because it was never absent. I failed to make room for her voice when it most needed to be heard. Rosamund felt the words move through her like warmth after long cold. A duke's apology, given before witnesses, had weight. But what shook her was not his rank. It was that he had named the harm without asking her to soften it. He turned to her then. I would like permission to call upon you properly at Mrs. Arden's house, with every propriety observed. Not as rescue. Not as reward. Not because scandal brought my name near yours. Because I wish to know the woman who stood where others expected her to kneel. The room seemed to retreat. Rosamund looked at the torn glove on the table, then at the man who had once taken command too quickly and now waited without moving. "If you call upon me," she said, "you must want my voice as well as my gratitude." "I do. And if my voice displeases you, then I shall be grateful to learn the truth before I become more foolish." A breath of laughter almost escaped her. "Almost. You may call," she said. Slowly. The restraint in his face changed into something quiet and almost unguarded. "Then I shall learn slowly and make room carefully." Outside the drawing room, Mayfair was already receiving a different story. Inside Calder-wick House, Rosamund stood with her name cleared, her mother's letters returning, and the glove that had once marked her humiliation lying open beneath the light as proof that even a torn thing could testify. By late September, the locked things in Rosamund's life had found their proper rooms. Her mother's letters lay no longer behind Lady Loxham's cabinet door, but inside a shallow drawer in Rosamund's own study at Harrowmere Hall, wrapped in the faded blue ribbon that had outlived every threat attached to it. She did not read them every day. Freedom had taught her not to devour what grief had once been denied. Some mornings she opened one page and traced the open capital M at the beginning of "My dearest Rosamund," smiling through the ache because the letter still breathed the way her mother had promised letters should. Other mornings she left the packet untouched and went about her work, knowing that love kept under her own key was still love returned. That morning, the south parlour of Harrowmere Hall had been arranged for the first meeting of the benevolent subscription Lady Augusta insisted on calling Rosamund's practical rebellion. There were lists upon the table, not of ladies to be pitied, but of dependent gentlewomen, governesses between places, widowed companions, and girls whose characters could be protected before desperation made them vulnerable to the first cruel household offering shelter. The subscription would provide temporary lodging, paid copying work, respectable placements, and written characters that could not be withdrawn by spite. Rosamund sat at the head of the small table while three neighbouring ladies, Mrs. Arden, and Lady Augusta argued over sums, references, and the difference between generosity and control. "Charity," Lady Augusta declared, tapping her cane against the floor, "is too often the art of keeping one hand above another. We shall do less hovering and more accounting." Mrs. Arden laughed softly. "Rosamund, I believe your committee has been conquered." "No," Rosamund said, dipping her pen. "Only disciplined." The answer drew a pleased sound from Lady Augusta, which she immediately disguised by criticizing the ink. Through the open window, Yorkshire light fell across the page in broad gold bands. Harrowmere Hall was not polished like Calder-wick House in London. It stood in pale stone above rolling fields, weathered by wind and honest rain, with long corridors that smelled faintly of beeswax, old books, and lavender carried in from the still room. It had taken Rosamund nearly a month to stop moving through it like a guest who might be asked to leave if she placed a hand on the wrong chair. The servants had helped by asking her questions that required answers, not gratitude. Mrs. Bellamy had written instructions ahead of the wedding, and the housekeeper at Harrowmere had followed them with formidable exactness. Her Grace preferred plain accounts, clear wages, and no locked cabinets holding what belonged to others. By noon, the meeting ended with 12 subscriptions, 2 promised placements, and 1 offer of copying work for a clergyman's widowed sister. Rosamund folded the final paper and placed it beside a letter from Elsie, which had arrived that morning in a careful young hand. Elsie was settled with a respectable vicar's widow near York, learning household management, and wrote that she might one day train to become a housekeeper if courage could be practiced like hemming linen. Rosamund had read that line 3 times. She read it again after the ladies departed, standing alone in the study with the letter near her mother's packet. "You are smiling at paper," Lady Augusta said from the doorway. "It is becoming a habit." Rosamund looked up. "Elsie says courage may be practiced. The girl is correct. Most virtues are habits that survived being inconvenient." Lady Augusta crossed the room and looked at the subscription papers. "Your mother would have approved." The words still had the power to quiet Rosamund. Not wound her. Quiet her. "I hope so. Hope wastes time when evidence is available." Lady Augusta nodded toward the drawer. "The letters prove she expected you to think, not merely endure. You have done both. One of them was forced upon you. The other is your own doing." Rosamund closed the drawer gently. You make affection sound like a legal finding. At my age, affection must be efficient. Yet Lady Augusta touched Rosamund's shoulder as she passed, a brief pressure, gone before sentiment could embarrass either of them. In the garden beyond the French doors, Adrian stood near the stone terrace with a square walnut box in his hands. Rosamund saw him through the glass and knew, before he looked up, that the box contained something he had considered burning, preserving, hiding, and finally offering. He had courted her slowly because she had asked him to. At Mrs. Arden's house, he had called with books, letters, and questions he did not already believe he had answered. He had brought no jewels until she laughed and told him restraint was not meant to become self-punishment. He had asked permission before speaking of marriage. When she took a full day to answer, he had not looked wounded by the waiting. The wedding had taken place in the small chapel at Harrowmere in July, with Mrs. Arden weeping openly, Lady Augusta pretending not to, and Mr. Tustell so satisfied with the settlement papers that he nearly smiled over them. After the vows, when the witnesses had stepped outside and sunlight lay across the chapel floor, Adrian had taken Rosamund's hand only after she offered it. "Have I learned to stand beside you well enough?" he had asked. She remembered his face then, stripped of public command, almost uncertain in the quiet. "You are learning," she had answered. "And when you forget, I shall tell you." "Good," he had said. "I didn't marry a woman with a voice in order to be spared hearing it." That had been the first moment she believed marriage to him would not become another elegant room where her gratitude was expected to sit down and be quiet. Now, on the terrace, he opened the walnut box when she joined him. The torn ivory glove lay inside upon folded linen, cleaned but not repaired. The ripped seam remained visible. The place where the sapphire clasp had been caught was still slightly strained, a small distortion no mending could honestly erase. Beside it rested the clasp itself in a paper packet marked by Mr. Tustell's narrow hand. Rosamund did not touch the glove at once. The sight no longer returned her wholly to the dinner table, but it opened the door enough for memory to pass through. Candlelight. Portia's fingers. Blood at her wrist. The Duke at the doorway. Her own voice, later, asking the question that made a room stop lying. "I thought at first it should be burned," Adrian said. "Then I thought it should be hidden. Then I realized both decisions were mine, and therefore suspect." She looked at him and smiled. "That is a severe judgment upon a box. The box is innocent. My instincts required supervision. And now." He held it out, not pressing it toward her, simply making it available. "Now it is yours to place, discard, preserve, or ignore. I had it made because evidence should not live forever in a solicitor's packet." Rosamund lifted the glove. It was lighter than she remembered, almost fragile, and that surprised her. Shame had given it such weight. "I do not want it hidden," she said. "Not in a drawer." "Where, then?" "In the study. Near the subscription books." His eyes softened. "So others may ask about it. So I may decide whether to answer." He nodded. "That is better." She set the glove back in the box, not like a wound being covered, but like testimony being given a proper shelf. Then, slowly, she removed the grey gloves from her own hands. The scar at her wrist had faded to a pale curve. It remained part of her, but it no longer seemed to demand concealment. Adrian saw it. He did not reach. He waited, as he had learned to wait, and the waiting was no emptiness. It was respect made visible. Rosamund placed her bare hand in his. Together they stepped from the terrace into the garden, where the fields beyond Harrowmere spread beneath the September sun and the wind moved freely over the grass. Behind her, in the study, her mother's letters rested under her own key, and the torn glove would soon stand beside the names of women who would not have to purchase shelter with silence. Beside her, the Duke of Calder-wick held her hand not as a prize rescued from ruin, but as a trust freely given. Rosamund walked into the light without gloves, without flinching, and without asking any room in the world for permission to be seen.